Cool. Hello.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to week 7 of the London Roller Derby Referee School. Oh. Dahlia, go on.
I am Dahlia or Cluster Schmuck, and I am the head ref of London Roller Derby.
Hello, I am Feminist Killjoy. My pronouns are they, them, and I am a roller derby referee affiliated with Dundee Roller Derby in Scotland. We also are joined today by an extraordinary selection of wonderful, helpful officials. So we have a bunch of people who are going to help us today with going over our in-depth scenarios that we shared in the Facebook group. So we have Lee from Hellfire Harlots in Nottingham, Kilobyte from London, Dread Hockley, Jens, Short Circuit, MC, Rollin' Rat, Chopsaw, and Shugs Bunny. So you will likely be having some more direct conversations later on in the session with one of these people. Dahlia, do you want to do
our
standard chat?
Standard chat. So we just remember to frame ourselves for this session. So as many of you might know, about a third of the people here are already an official of some kind of different levels, but they already are an official, whether that be an NSO or a skating official. About a third don't know anything, may never been to a game of roller derby, but would like to be an official. And about a third, or 22.4%, so not really a third, are a player who would like to learn the rules, but currently has no interest in becoming an official. And that's important for us so that we remember to frame ourselves around the questions that are being asked, and that there is no such thing as a silly question, because this is a space where we can learn stuff. And then on the next slide, it will say that there are 31 different countries represented as well. So it's important that, Tem and I are framing ourselves predominantly from a UK European perspective, although we've officiated elsewhere. And actually our guest officials are from all over. And so if you do something differently, share that, because it's interesting learning, and it's important not to diminish where you're from because we're saying something that might contradict that. Over the last few weeks, we've covered loads of stuff. It's like so much stuff now. We've gone over nearly all of the different types of penalties in terms of where you can block, in terms of where you can target, in terms of what you can block with and where you can target, things about the engagement zone, and therefore what the Pact is. And today we're going to be talking a bit more about things to do with discretion, which is really important when you are a roller derby official.
Before that, we've just got a couple of things to go over. So one of the things, something came up in our Q&A after last week's session, and that we had some feedback that it was maybe worthwhile sharing it to everybody in the main session. So we'll do that now. We had a great question come up about some of the ways that we can approach, ask for, and deliver some accessibility adjustments for any participants who might have any additional access needs. And I kind of said that my general approach, my way of doing that kind of thing, is to really try and stress that there shouldn't be any pressure or any onus on a person who has a disability or who has any kind of accessibility requirement to deliver that information before they get what they need. In order for a space to be radically inclusive, we need to be trying to meet those needs and anticipate those needs without pressurizing people to ask for them. And so that means, while it's important, we can say, if there are any particular adjustments, if there are specific cues, if there are specific signals and so on that are really useful for a skater on your team, do feel free to let us know and we'll implement them. Here are the things that we will do as standard. We will make sure that everyone in the penalty box gets a visual signal as well as a verbal signal. We will make sure that we make this adjustment and so on. But let people know that they can come to you with specific access needs, but they don't have to in order to be able to participate in the game. Was that kind of the crux of that, Dahlia?
Yep, it was. But there are some good questions in the end of last week's session. So if you're interested in kind of accessibility and a bit more about the captain's meeting and the officials meeting, there is more of that in the Q&A from last week. Other points is that we are really interested in your questions. We would like next week's session to be predominantly around the areas that you would like to know more about. We've already had a few emails, but if you would like to just fill in a form and let us know your questions so we can go through them, or any scenarios, tiny.cc/LRD ref questions. Another piece of information, if you weren't at the session last week, is that ref school is going to be 9 weeks now rather than 10. So our final session will be June 14th. And that we've created a website which has links to all of the resources because some people aren't enjoying Facebook. And so officiallyawesome.uk is where you can find links to the magnetic roller derby board and the kind of focus training link that Holt's created and everything else you want.
Great. Okay, so the first thing before we jump into some in-depth scenarios, we're just going to quickly go over something we haven't touched on yet, which is some of the most expected pathways of intra-official communication. So as a referee, which other non-skating officials specifically might you find yourself talking to the most? So as a JAMA referee, you'll find yourself having lots and lots of contact with scorekeepers. That's very important. But also what can happen a lot for JAMA referees is communicating with the penalty box manager, particularly around JAMA status after a star pass or additional penalties if there have been insubordination misconduct penalties. For outside Pact referees, the standard chat, they're being the closest to any NSOs who are situated on the outside. OPRs often do communicate with penalty box officials, and also if there are lineup tracking officials situated on the outside of the track, but also penalty trackers on the infield. And if there's a combined penalty lineup tracker on the infield, there's lots of OPRs getting very tall and making eye contact across the pack to communicate with people who are tracking the important penalty stats. Front inside pack referee, typically the NSO they will most likely communicate with is also penalty and lineup tracking officials. And the head referee, the answer is obviously everybody. The head referee often has to interact with pretty much any other official who's in the space, but the head referee has a particularly close communicative relationship with the jam timer, the head NSO, with the penalty box manager, and generally penalty lineup trackers as well, communicating lots of information outwards. And these do have arrows going that way, which were automatically inserted by the slide thing, and I couldn't make them go away. But it's not a one-way street for communication. Everyone is always talking to each other. So these are also the people who are likely to approach you or have questions for you as a referee.
Also, we've noticed that some people are having issues with the chat and also logging in. So if it's issues with the chat, you might want to sign in and sign out and make sure your Zoom is up to date, because I think there's just been an update. But in terms of, wait, sorry, Tam, this is you.
Okay. And then the other thing we wanted to go over was that our last penalty family, we have looked into in depth and all the different kind of penalty types. And the last one we have left is illegal procedures. So from the rules, we have skaters who violate the rules of the game should be penalized if they have significant impact on the game. So illegal procedures is a penalty issued for procedural technical infractions that are not covered by the other penalty families, contact penalties, misconduct, game structure penalties around kind of pack and engagement zone and position. So it's things like uniform and equipment violations, leaving the penalty box before your time has been served, entering the penalty box to communicate with the penalised skater. And the casebook, again, as in the case of all of the different kinds of penalties, there are some good examples of when these things have impact and when they don't. So if you're not sure, when does talking to someone in the penalty box become a penalty? When does crossing through the penalty box become a penalty? The casebook is very clear on those things. So we don't want to spend too much time on illegal procedures. It's generally things that are kind of structural, technical, mostly people get penalized for them because they forgot things like armbands and so on. But it's just to try and keep the game as coherent and understandable as possible. We can all recognize who each other is and what role we're playing. So visibly displaying the A and all of that kind of stuff.
Correcting errors. A lot of the scenarios we're going to talk about today are about discretion, and actually correcting errors in some ways is also discretion. It's really important to own your mistakes because usually they can be fixed and they are always an opportunity to learn from them. And I think the more honest and transparent you are, the smoother things go in terms of fixing it, in terms of the teams and bench staff understanding how the officials are doing, and in terms of being able to kind of move on from whatever the mistake might be. In terms of penalty errors, whether you've made a call or whether you've not made a call and would like to, they can be adjusted until the start of the following jam. So you've got a jam, then you've got the 30-second break, and then you've got another jam. In that 30-second break, and any time during the jam that you've realized, oh, I shouldn't have called that, or oh, I wish, you know, that was a penalty, you can call that penalty at any time. If you're calling it within the jam and it's really delayed, you might want to say, and I would recommend it, you know, yellow 2-1 cut delayed call, so that they understand that it's not something they'd done in a recent time. If you're doing it in between jams and you feel like you need to have more conversation because you actually want to talk to another official, you want to get another viewpoint, you think you might need to remove a penalty or potentially give a penalty, call an official timeout if you need to. It can be worthwhile, and you can work out whether that's worthwhile and make sure you speak to your head ref as well. Score adjustments. So that's particularly for jam refs. They can be made up until the end of the following jam. So that's why it's really important for you to have communication in place with your score tracker about what do you need to do if you've realized that there should have been some points from the previous jam that you'd like to add on now. And so there were like different ways that you can correct errors. And it's worth understanding that giving a penalty or rescinding a penalty doesn't say that you are a good or a bad ref. It just says that there is something that should have happened out of fairness or safety, and it didn't.
Often, as a result of clarifying conversations on other issues, there'll be a series of events that combine, and you may realize late, because you literally didn't have the information beforehand, that something should or should not have been penalized or been responded to in that way. So it's important to be able to acknowledge that everything that happens in a jam affects each other, and we can make deductions and adjustments based on the things that we come to realize a little bit later.
Additionally, the thing I did not say is if you have given a penalty and then you've realized that was not a penalty, you can say color number return to track. And then what you want to make sure you do is when the jam ends, make sure you've gone up to the NSOs who are counting the penalties to ensure that you've told them that penalty was removed. And if necessary, go up to that skater and explain it if it feels as though they would like to understand more. If you are giving a penalty between jams, you shouldn't whistle, but otherwise it's exactly the same. And often you'll just go closer to them so you don't have to shout it.
And also, as we've spoken about with other, when we spoke about giving penalties between jams or talking about expulsion situations and so on previously, you can use full sentences. You don't have to speak only in the verbal cues. Those are for delivering penalties mid-jam, and you're always able to add more. And definitely between jams, if you're issuing a penalty or if you're clarifying something or if you're changing something, you can speak to someone in a clear full sentence and say, I'm issuing you an additional penalty for this action that happened at this time. You don't have to be very robotic about it. In fact, it's probably unconstructive if you are. Okay, so we're going to jump into some in-depth scenarios. We did post these in advance in the Facebook group, but hopefully maybe Dahlia, if you could put the link to the Google document in the chat just now, that would be really useful while I go through scenario 1. This one is quite lengthy. There are lots of moving parts, but hopefully you should be able to understand what's going on. So, scenario 1. It is the gold medal game of a WFTDA sanctioned tournament. Big, important. The jam begins with 1 minute and 40 seconds left on the period clock in period 2. The score is white 162, black 165. It's high stakes. There's not long left. Last jam. So the situation is this. The black jammer legally passes all teammates as well as white blockers 1, 2, and 3 on their initial trip through the pack. White pivot knocks black jammer out of bounds at the front of the pack on the inside line before black jammer is ever able to pass them. At the time of this contact, white pivot is the foremost upright and inbounds blocker. So let's just see how this jam looks. So right at the very beginning of the jam, there's some extra information happening here that we don't actually find out till later in the scenario, but chronologically, this is how it goes in the jam. So what we can note is that white pivot is false starting by touching the jammer line. White pivot makes contact to black blocker 1, which allows the white jammer to pass and earn position on black blocker 1 from that false starting position. White pivot is called for a failure to yield penalty because of the impact of this pass, but it's not heard because there is so much noise happening. Like we said, this is the last jam potentially of a gold medal game. Everyone is very loud, and also because this was a false start warning that potentially became a failure to yield cue so quickly, everything got muddled up. Maybe that rear OPR stumbled a little bit, tripped up over that, but the white pivot doesn't really acknowledge that they have been issued a penalty, and they sprint forward to try and catch the other jammer. Okay, so at this point, the black jammer has passed all of the blockers apart from the white pivot. So this is the white pivot who had false started and is just going one-on-one with them, and they knock them to the infield and recycle them. Okay. The white jammer has been held at the back of this pack the entire time, but now breaks free and leaves at the front, having earned a pass on all blockers. Their jammer referee declares them lead jammer. At the same time, a number of long penalty whistles are being blown. The venue is very loud and it's hard to hear communication clearly. In the ensuing confusion, white jammer leaves the track for the penalty box, mistaking the lead jammer whistles for a penalty. So white jammer gets out the front. Here's the whistles go. Here's the OPR trying to get that pivot off who's just not listening to them. Everything is going wild. This is all happening very quickly. And the white jammer takes himself off the track because they think they've got a penalty and they want to get it done as quickly as possible. So they take themselves mistakenly to the penalty box. The black jammer is held in the pack still when the white pivot leaves the track, having been issued an illegal position penalty for failure to yield. So that's failure to yield that false start. The head referee communicates to the black jammer referee that this call came from the outside at the very beginning of the jam, but has only just managed to be caught and received. So the black jammer referee has information now that that white pivot false started. So white pivot's failure to yield penalty is finally communicated successfully. They go off. The black jammer is still held. The white jammer referee is eventually able to communicate that the white jammer should return to track, resumes holding up the lead jammer hand signal, pointing at the white jammer, and the white jammer passes through the entire engagement zone legally, earns a pass on every skater, and begins tapping their hips. The white jammer referee calls off the jam and holds up 4 points. And by this time, the period clock has expired. So white jammer referee gets them back on the track. They go wee all the way around, through, and we hold up 4 points. And at this point, the game is over. The score is now white 166, black 165. Black team uses their official review, saying that their jammer should have been declared lead as soon as the black jammer referee noticed that the white pivot the only unpassed blocker, have been penalised at the beginning of the jam, failure to yield after a false start. They request that an additional jam should happen, and that the white jammer should be penalised for calling off the jam illegally, thus bringing the jam to an unnatural conclusion. Your goal now in the breakout rooms that we'll run is to discuss this with your facilitating official, and we'll come back and talk through some of the interesting points in this scenario all together in a few minutes' time. Welcome back to the main room. I think people will be slowly flowing in. I think some people are still in breakout rooms. So we have a couple of our facilitators back. Does anybody have any quick reflections on this first scenario? Anything that really bubbled up quite quickly for everybody based on the bizarre events of this gold medal game?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Lee. Okay,
thanks. So first of all, I think we all agreed that this was very, very anxious, and everybody had anxiety even trying to think about it. I think we got to the nub of the matter pretty quickly. But one thing we did spend a lot of time discussing was actually whether to withdraw the points awarded or not. And we spent a little while talking about that. And I think in the end, we decided that we can all agree that an official error had happened. And I think we did, in fact, all agree to, award an extra jam. But in the end, we agreed that we would not modify the score because those points were legitimately earned, right? And even though it was a whole calamitous series of events, they earned those points. And that the score would not be amended.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are some really good reflections. I think I'm gonna skip on or actually, are there any other facilitators back in the main room now who have something similar or different that they would like to say about the result of that scenario?
Yes. We spent a bit of time discussing whether we should give an insubordination penalty to the white pivot for not leaving the track when they were originally instructed to. People felt that it had quite an impact on the jam that they'd failed to leave the track when they were initially instructed. They were on the track for a long time afterwards. However, as we discussed it more, we felt that they'd not heard the instruction to leave the track. There was no evidence that they had, and so that they shouldn't receive an additional insubordination penalty over and above the failure to yield.
Yeah, it's a really a tough factor, that one, that definitely involves discretion. And I think a key piece of information that we just don't have is how long this actually how long it took for this all to happen. Because while there are lots of words and lots of different things going on, that's because we're describing kind of 6 or 7 different simultaneous events. And actually the jam that was much like this, that inspired this scenario that I experienced, everything happened within the space of about 12 to 15 seconds. So it's kind of really tough without that knowledge, without seeing whether there was any recognition, to make that call from the information we have about whether or not an insubordination penalty should be assessed. And I think either take on that is kind of valid with the information that we have. Okay.
Yeah, so we actually discussed that too, and one of the points that we made, I think, is really important, is the difference between not hearing and not listening. We assumed for this scenario that they didn't hear, but that is a very important thing when you're considering insubordination for failure to leave the track, is the difference between literally not being able to hear or understand and then just actively not listening. And I think that's cool.
Okay. All right, so I'm quickly going to go through the next scenario. We have somehow used a lot more time than 12 minutes for a 12-minute thing, which I don't really understand. So our next 2 scenario discussions are going to be a little bit shorter. They won't be 12 minutes in the breakout room. It's more likely to be 9 to 10 minutes in the breakout room. But we'll jump in now to scenario 2, part A. And I'll do both parts, scenario 2A and B, before we jump into the breakout room. So scenario 2A. White blocker 1 initiates shoulder-to-shoulder contact with black jammer that causes black jammer to briefly put one skate down out of bounds on the infield. Oh no, look, that black jammer's gone out. White blocker 1 maintains their inbounds and upright position, and black jammer passes them while straddling before putting their out of bounds skate back down within the track boundary, now ahead of white blocker 1. Black jammer takes an additional stride on the track in the counterclockwise direction and makes forceful contact to the back of white blocker 2, knocking them down. Oh. Okay, so that's part A. So there we have an action where the jammer gets knocked out, re-enters ahead of the initiator, then forcefully makes contact to an opponent's back. Okay, in the reverse order, we have a situation where black jammer makes forceful contact to the back of white blocker 2, knocking them down. So white blocker 2 goes down quite quickly. Then the white blocker 1 initiates shoulder-to-shoulder contact with black jammer that causes black jammer to briefly put one skate down out of bounds on the infield. And then the white blocker maintains their position as the black jammer passes everyone and continues to skate forward, making no attempt to seed. So these are two situations with very similar actions, but happening in a slightly different order. And we're going to jump into our breakout rooms once again to discuss these situations and how they differ.
Sure. So in scenario part A, the cutting action occurred first and then the back block occurred. So we discussed that the jammer should receive both a cutting and a back block penalty in that scenario. However, in part 2, because the back block occurred first, the position that they gained as a result of cutting, so to speak, is negated. So it should just be the one penalty for the back block.
Great. Yeah.
So we spent a bit of time in our breakout room talking about what if instead of taking that extra stride for scenario 1, that the very next thing that happened was that contact to the back. And so there wasn't, in that case, if it's the natural momentum of that skater that brings them into the back of white blocker 2, there's not an opportunity to cede that illegally gained position, but the back block still happens. So in that case, we decided that we would not call the cut, but the back block would stand.
Yeah, so absolutely. In both those situations, the key thing is that, you know, if you have the back block and then the cut, their illegal gain of position is meaningless after the back block. And similarly, if you have a cut that immediately becomes a back block before the illegally gained position has an opportunity to be ceded, it also is meaningless because it can't be illegally maintained either at the point that the back block happens. Great, fantastic. I realize we really have no time, which is kind of bizarre, but I'm going to deliver the third scenario and we will break out room again. I will say if there is any host who can't stay for the whole time, send your folks into the main room, just not into the breakout room, which if you just leave the breakout room, that will do. But if anyone is able to stick around and stay a little bit, I think it would be great if we could still have a discussion. So let me try and share my screen again. Dum 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 dum. Scenario 3. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen. Sorry, I am useless with technology. Yay. Scenario 3. Okay, So, you are the rear OPR when you witness the following action. A jammer from each team lines up behind the jammer line, preparing for the coming jam. You recognize both jammers and know that they are in a long-term relationship. Maybe you follow them on Instagram, despite playing for two different teams. Just as the jam start whistle is sounded, you see white jammer make sharp but not forceful contact to black jammer's buttocks with the flat of their hand in an action you might describe as spanking or slapping. Black jammer does not appear to be negatively affected by this action in any way and swiftly gains lead jammer nimbly skating up the outside line. Okay. We have no magnetic whiteboard visualization for that action, but hopefully it's fairly clear what happened there. So we can go break out once more into our rooms and have a little chat.
Well, that was a roller coaster.
Yeah. Thank you everyone who has stayed around for sticking around. Are there any facilitators who would like to reflect a little bit about this last scenario? Jens, yeah, go ahead.
So one thing we very quickly came to the conclusion that we're talking about misconduct penalty in this instance. But we had a bit of discussion about whether the knowledge of both skaters being in a relationship has or should have an impact on our call. And we came to the conclusion that during the game, this information is basically irrelevant because skaters cannot expect to be treated differently based on the knowledge because not everybody has this knowledge, and actions on the track should not be put into this context of like outside of the gameplay.
Yeah, very interesting and important. Yeah. Are there any other facilitator want to reflect a little bit on this one?
We had, I guess, a bit of discussion early on of, given the context of do we know there's skaters or not, should we go to the captains between jams and warn that this action shouldn't happen, it's not appropriate, and if it happened again, then go to a penalty, and that penalty being misconduct. But then discussed, we don't know if other skaters may be in a relationship, the crowd doesn't know what's going on, and based on which context you're looking from, it's hard to tell if that's all right for either skater or not, and maybe the action should be immediately a penalty because it can be seen as sexual harassment if you don't know who the skaters are, and should potentially be a misconduct directly.
Yeah, so there's an element potentially of external perception as well, that regardless of what knowledge the officials or the skaters or internally, culturally, there might be, even, for example, if the whole audience knows these people, you know, if it's being filmed, if it's being broadcast, is anybody, you know, misconduct, we also talk about the integrity of the sport and so on. Is there anybody possibly witnessing this action that doesn't have the information we have, even if everybody in that room has explicitly been told that these skaters are very happy to be intimate with one another on the jam line? That is there anybody that could be witnessing this that doesn't have the information? I think that perspective is really relevant as well. Okay, any last reflections?
Something that came up just in our group was about, it was only brief that, you know, if people are hugging or people are dancing, that's very different because it does come down to the consent that's being given by like people hugging, and if they're, you know, if they're on opposing teams and things like that, in terms of also like how people will perceive it. And even, you know, I've seen players who kiss on the jam line, and actually in some ways like that's happening not in a spontaneous way right near the end. It still may not be the most appropriate, but there's obviously more elements of consent. And at any point, if you're not sure, even if you don't penalize, it's okay to check in with them and go, were you okay? Are you okay? And have that like level of care.
Yeah. And I think use some judgment and discretion about, you know, when and where and how you raise that kind of thing, because we're discussing this as this may mechanically come under the description of sexual harassment, but it also might not just be mechanical, right? We can't know the nature of other people's relationships. We can't know potential control and abuse dynamics that absolutely do exist within relationships that we know without knowing it too clearly. So we cannot make assumptions that it wasn't necessarily even well intended, you know? So I think it's really important that we take care to check in with people in any situation that we're not sure about.
We also touched on it's like Jens said, it's no rest right to use knowledge that's aware to them because it might not be aware to anyone else. So is it worth bringing that kind of thing up with the head ref to make them aware of it beforehand, and for also to bring it to the captain's meeting as teams? But also if there's anything within the officiating side of it towards skaters, like officials do date skaters, but also on the part of the checking in with the skaters, and then the escalation point of where, if it's not, how far can this go? Is it down to the head ref to raise, or where does it go from that was brought up? And also other things that come under the same sector of the policies with mispronaming, dead naming, verbal abuse, the language that's used towards each other, and racism as well also comes under a similar banner, and how to deal with that.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Yeah, the quote, this was in our kind of document as well, the quote from the WFTDA Code of Conduct. It's Appendix 4, section Sexual Harassment in the WFTDA Code of Conduct is the kind of go-to for the by the book version of this, but even then there are still some subjectivities and there are some nuances based on different situations. So we've all had the opportunity to chat about those things a little bit. But what I would say is that when it comes to any kind of harassment or potentially abusive behavior, anything that could be considered aggression or microaggressions based on vulnerable factors, err on the side of caution and be vigilant. Like it's our responsibility to kill some fun a little bit if it's potentially keeping any small potential of a vulnerable population safe.
Yeah.
Sorry.
One thing specifically that was mentioned in ours is whether or not those two are partners. By allowing it and not penalizing or warning in any way, it potentially creates a space where someone else who might experience something similar or different might feel unsafe in their game. And so regardless of pre-existing relationships, it's not about those two, it's about everybody on the track.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so we're going to kind of jump away from this thing. Will I share the link for our scenarios or questions? We're going to do another session on in-depth scenarios. And what that means is we would like to know what kind of things are going to be most helpful to you, the participants. This week was obviously produced based on some of the things we've discussed, some of the questions that have been asked, and some of the things that are important to us in our brains. But we would love to tailor this, if we can, to the kind of things that you, the people who are coming here every week to talk with us about roller derby, would really like to know more about. So I don't think we've had any responses yet in this. So don't worry about overwhelming us. If you have anything that you would particularly like us to dig into in this kind of format another time, please do go and fill out that form and let us know. Dahlia, do you want to say this?
Yeah, I will. So that is it. Thank you for being officially awesome. We're going to hang around for another kind of 15 minutes as usual for any further questions. This is a free course. If you would like to donate, please feel free to donate to LRD or any of the food banks. And I haven't spoken to anyone about this, but if you would like to donate, there's also a lot of stuff going on with Black Lives Matter, who could probably really do with financial support right now. And I think London Roller Derby would be fine with me saying that. And if not, do what you'd like with your money and try and support those who really need it right now, both in the pandemic and in the wider world.
Absolutely.
On that note, Tam, do you want to unshare your screen? And we'll do what we usually do for about a minute or two of tell us, do a hand signal, and then we'll do some questions. Do this really quickly. So illegal re-entry. We'll start on a hard one today. What's the hand signal for illegal re-entry? Oh, yeah, we're getting there. Awesome. Yep. Is that? Tam, do you want to do one?
Yeah, sure. Backblock. Yeah.
Awesome.
I like to think all the facilitators aren't doing it because they don't know the answer, not because they're trying to give people a chance.
Direction. Yeah. Tam, one for you.
I'm terrible at thinking of these. I think I do the same one all the time. Outplay in the back.
Yeah. Good job. Multiplayer. Oh, seeing some people thinking. Yeah, perfect. You want it nice and high. The important thing is to make sure that the skaters can see it, the NSOs can see it, the audience can see it, the announcers can see it. Wonderful. Okay, cool. So we've had a few questions that we are going to go over. Any of our amazing facilitators, if you would like to answer any of them, either comment so that I can see, or just start speaking, and we'll hope for the best. The internet copes with that. Otherwise, it will just be Tem and I, but your views are very, very much valued, so please say them. In terms of penalty errors, where someone is already serving a penalty, how do you call that off? Can you, or is it prior to reporting and it's just struck off the record? Tem.
Sorry, I missed the first part of that question.
In terms of if you've got a penalty error, so you've given a penalty, they are in the penalty box, and you've realised, nope, that should not have been a penalty to them or at all, what do you do?
So I think, kind of as we said before, if it's in the jam in progress and you realise that you want to just correct it as quickly as possible, communicate to that skater as quickly as possible, get them back in the jam to try and minimise the impact of their absence on the gameplay. In terms of the reporting of it, you want to make sure that the paperwork is accurate and that skater is not written on any NSO paperwork as having been issued that penalty, because potentially they could foul out, and if they never actually committed that penalty, if that's their 7th penalty, or if that's the 3rd penalty but it eventually gets to 7 penalties, there is a huge impact there. So that's something that you can do after the jam. If you can't cover it in the middle of the jam, the priority in the middle of the jam is to get the skater back in the game. But after that, yeah, you want to make sure that it's not on that penalty tracking paperwork, it's not on the whiteboard, and also very importantly that the skater themselves knows that that penalty didn't happen. Sometimes we get people back in the game and we communicate these kind of things without actually explaining what we changed or what we fixed, and it's important to give the information to the skater that thing didn't happen or they didn't do that thing, rather than they're just being returned to track.
I have a related question, Tam.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think Jens had an answer, so maybe I can hear Jens's chat first.
Yeah, just in addition to it, that also counts if the skater has already fully served the penalty. Like, yes, even if we don't have to take them out of the box, we still would redeem the penalty from the paperwork and from the skater.
Lee, do you still have a question, or were you going to ask about that?
So, I mean, it's a rhetorical question, but so what if we accidentally penalize a jammer? Can we just, you know, give them some free points to make up for it?
Yeah, all the points, hundreds of points. No,
So this
never.
is this is related to the first scenario we discussed in our breakout room, that you can't just second guess what would have happened. So even though we made a mistake, we can't just give them 3 points.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You can only really adjust advantage and fairness by giving equitable opportunity for people to, you know, fix things. Like in the case of giving an extra jam at the end, it's giving people an opportunity to do something different, to reclaim like the ownership of the actions of that jam. Absolutely, we can't be trying to balance scales of penalties versus points versus advantage, or we'll just give that team an extra penalty because we penalized these people accidentally or whatever. Yeah, we're never really making those decisions. It does mean that sometimes we make those mistakes, and if it only impacts one skater in a whole game, then our officiating errors haven't impacted both teams equally, and that's kind of our failing and our thing to work on as officials. But it's not something that we can compensate for. It's just something we need to do better at. But I assure you that we make enough mistakes collectively over the course of any game that there's never only one skater who is impacted.
What a day that would be.
This just brings me on to something that we discussed in our first breakout group, which was if you have a jam where everything goes so wrong, like that one, can you just say, let's nullify the jam, let's pretend it didn't happen? That was a question that came up.
I'm sure some teams and some skaters would really wish that we could. But yeah, no, I think actually what came up in reflection from that last session, I think Lee, you fed it back from your group about like, yeah, okay, lots of things went wrong and lots of things weren't held and facilitated properly, and as officials we're there to facilitate things, and actually if we let that ball drop a little bit, and sometimes it can be really significant and sometimes it can really affect the game, but actually everyone who's still playing the game is doing their best job at playing the game, and they're out there doing those actions, they're still experiencing those things physically and emotionally, and they're still earning the points they're earning, they're still committing the penalties they're committing, and the game is still happening even if we're not holding it as successfully as we'd like. So all we can do is try our absolute best and be humble and gentle with each other and with the teams as we discuss and reflect afterwards, particularly if you kind of something big goes wrong in an early game in a tournament and you have more games coming up with the same teams potentially. There's a big emotional management side of just kind of acknowledging that things weren't maybe quite as they would like, but trying to know that you can do better without losing any sense of confidence in what's going on. It's a tough balance.
As always, we only have 9 minutes left, but if you want to ask a question verbally, you don't feel comfortable writing it, then please just say you'd like to ask it, and one of the mods will get to us. In terms of the scenario around the slapping, would it cause a penalty if they were on the same team? And what would happen if they were on the way to the bench and it wasn't active gameplay when that happened?
Yeah, I feel like, again, I kind of hoggle the speaking in these sections, but I'll say some things. So when it's between teammates, misconduct still exists, but penalties for misconduct are a little bit different and they don't meet quite the same threshold. And particularly if we're looking at the description given in the code of conduct, it does specify actions between members of opposing teams, and that doesn't mean that it's automatically okay. It means that you might not necessarily immediately penalize and escalate. In a situation where there's contact between teammates, it absolutely depends on the nature of the contact, depends on broader context. There's always going to be factors to consider, but I potentially would be more likely in that situation to give a warning to captains and alternates without moving directly to penalization. I think it's, yeah, because there isn't the black and white distinction of this is action between opponents. So sometimes this is part of the way a team trains, and sometimes, like, even if it exists in a culture and we prefer it not to, it still exists in the culture. So we can set expectations about that. If we can preventatively set expectations around behavior and conduct in advance, like, that's ideal. And I hope that, like, culturally, the work that we can do by just existing in the world and talking to other people who do roller derby, like, I feel like no one who's met me within the world of roller derby is ever going to try and, like, slap my butt in a game of roller derby, because, like, culturally, who I am in this world is not someone who is within, like, that culture. So there's some kind of softer skill stuff around it of just trying to make roller derby be the thing we want it to be, when we can't just give people a penalty.
Yeah, and just speaking on teammates, I think, you know, sport has a long history of, like, the good game pat between teammates, and there's a big difference between, like, good game and, like, a smack. And I think, you know, there's things that are sporting that, like, a good game pat is not something you're going to notice necessarily. And I think that's the biggest difference, is making it noticeable and just being like, we did good stuff, but also just high five your teammates. It's, like, way more satisfying.
I mean, who doesn't? I mean, some people don't love a good high five, so I'm not even going to question who doesn't love it, but I definitely like a good high five. I particularly like a high five where you miss it intentionally. When I used to work at summer camp, the kids hated it. It was very frustrating. Next question. If the jammer, we're going back to the kind of complicated jammer scenario. If a jammer were penalized incorrectly, would you ever give the opposing jammer a penalty to impact equally? The opposing jammer would then sit down the same amount of time, or not a penalty, and the other jammer just sits in the box for the same amount of time? Does anyone want to answer?
Yeah, just go on.
No. You should never, like, undo a wrong by doing another wrong. So intentionally, like, penalizing the other jammer to, like, level out the playing field will just bring down the game way more than the actual mistake would ever do. In addition, issuing a penalty where no infraction has happened is just, like, abuse of power by the officials, and we are there to facilitate a game and not to create a game into what we think is fair or is not. And that means, like, owning up to our own mistakes, trying to lessen the impact of our mistakes as much as possible, instead of escalating them to another level.
It's also, it would become really speculative, which is super problematic in the sense that we can only act based on things that have happened. We can make adjustments. We can undo our errors in terms of fixing things. But even when we're looking at actions, we don't penalize based on what might have happened if that had continued and that kind of thing. Most of the time, there are some situations where that's not true. But anyway, generally speaking, we can't be speculating about how things would have been if we'd done things differently. And we also can't be speculating about, like, who gets to decide which jammer we should penalize. Like, do you get to pick? We think that's their, like, third rotation jammer, so let's pick out this one on the other team to make them, like, if it's impossible to try and do those mechanical things to balance scales without absolutely, like Jens said, just becoming abusing the power that we have as officials. Like, if we mess up, we can't start trying to, like, pull more strings.
Yeah. Okay. For the question around penalizing, change the subject again, for the question around penalizing someone incorrectly and they're already in the box, say that you're an IPR and you gave that penalty, how do you communicate that if it's a distance? Could you talk to one of the NSOs? Should you talk to one of the other skating officials? What's the best way to do it if you're an IPR and trying to get someone out of the box?
Try.
Go get them out of the box. If it's loud and nothing's happening, there's ideally in a game there's 2 IPRs for a reason. You say BRB, and then you literally, if no one sees you, you just go and get them.
Yeah.
Leave your position to fix the game. If the penalty tracker's right behind you and they're like, I got it, great. But if not, same, we talked about a little bit. If you're the outside pack ref with that like white pivot thing and no one hears you, come inside, go outside, go where you need to be to fix the game as quickly as possible.
Yeah, it's also in the slide we had about officials fixing scoring errors, that kind of thing. And there was the thing that as a JAMA referee, you can have a way of communicating, or you can just like say to the head ref, I need you to go and add 2 points to the white team and then keep doing your job, because like someone in the inside can just leave their position completely. And there's a question in the chat here, can the IPR enter the track, go over the track, go to the penalty box, go to the score table during a jam in progress? Absolutely. Like, we don't want to be out of position. We don't want to like reduce the number of eyes on the track. But if we're trying to yell from the position we're in to communicate something that's already impacting the game, and we're not able to efficiently or like significantly fix the thing that is currently actively messing with the game, whereas leaving and moving out position might mess with the game, it is infinitely better to skate away and deal with the thing in a place that's not the position you're supposed to be in. But yeah, as Chop said, tell your pals, tell the people that are working around you that you've gone, tell them where you're going. Don't just disappear, but yeah, you can go wherever you need to go to get things done.
Technically, a skating official can kind of go anywhere on the track at any time they feel it's necessary to do it. You should obviously be safe. As Chop has said in the comments, cross the track ideally around the pack and not through it, which I think is wise advice nearly at all times as an official. And the other thing to say is if you can communicate that with an NSO, that's fine. NSOs will often not do that because it can cause more confusion, but that is fine. We have one final question. In a situation of an official review and they're asking for an extra jam and a penalty on a jammer, can multiple outcomes be requested in an official review and it still be retained, or can you only ask for one outcome? Does anyone want to answer that quickly?
Yes. Yeah, this is a myth that you can only ask for one thing and that the official review has to be only about one thing, and if you ask for the wrong thing, then officials can't help you even if there was something that went wrong. No, an official review is asking officials to review a situation. So it's an officiating decision and explicitly any related decisions. And sometimes lots and lots of things need to change as a result of conversations that happen in official reviews. You can describe as many different things that you think should be done. Sometimes like one officiating decision has 6 different necessary outcomes. You probably don't need to describe all those things as you're asking for a review. You just need to be clear about which decision, which situation, and which like related decisions should be reviewed. Dread.
Yeah, I like to think of official reviews as an opportunity for the officiating crew to do right by the game. And it's our job to make sure that we are doing right by the game. And that means, if that means fixing multiple things, then we are obligated to do that.
Yeah, if you realize in an official review discussion that a jammer cut and actually they asked for an illegal reentry penalty and you're like, no, it wasn't an illegal reentry, it was a cut. I mean, I know those are kind of the same thing, but if they ask for one thing and you discover in the official review conversation that a different thing happened, I've heard officials say, oh, they didn't ask for that, so we just leave it. And like, no, don't do that. If you realize something needs to change it, even if it wasn't what was asked for. Because also we have a much more nuanced, and we spend a lot of time phrasing things properly, talking about situations in exactly the way that we think we should speak about them. Oftentimes it's a real privileged position that we're in to have the language of the rules so drummed into our brains. And also there's issues of privilege between native language English speakers and second language English speakers, that actually, if you require someone to perfectly request exactly the thing that you're going to fix for them before you fix it, you're just being an ass, and you're not doing your job properly at all.
I would say 2 more things before we end this, which is the rules say that they are time for a specific officiating decision. However, as Tem said, if you have realized that something could have been corrected, but they didn't ask it, correct it. It's not the team's fault. And sometimes they do an official review, you get that time to really speak about something, and you realize that actually the team who asked for an official review have ended up getting a penalty. That happens. But you definitely shouldn't use it as a reason to not correct yourself because they weren't specific about their wording. But it is important to understand what they're asking. So that's also something that's important in an official review, that you understand that. And on that note, I feel like I had something else to say.
Sorry,
but
can I quickly just clarify, because I disagree, that it is explicit that it's a single decision and related officiating decisions. Related officiating decisions are explicitly included in what an official review is about. So other decisions are part of the thing.
Oh no, completely. I agree entirely. So yeah, I wasn't saying that. I'm saying that you should understand what they're saying, so you just don't go and talk about something completely separate. But if other things come up from that, you shouldn't be ignoring it at all because it's not exactly the wording that they said. Yeah. Jens looks like he really wants to say something. If you have to go, you can go. But Jens, whilst we've got you.
Yeah, I can probably clarify, because the rules are very, like, rules ask a team to ask for a specific officiating decision to be reviewed, but within the review, the officials review the officiating error as well as related to the situation things. So a team cannot come in and ask for like 6 things that happen over the course of the jam. They need to ask for a specific situation to be, or specific what is it said? Specific.
So it's a specific decision
to be reviewed, but then we review the situation around that specific situation. What led to the decision, and if the decision was wrong, what other decisions were related to it, and does anything else need to be like taking action about it?
And there's a difference between 6 different decisions and 6 different outcomes. Like one officiating decision and one officiating error, one situation that they're coming in to ask about can have multiple things that need to be done as a result. So you shouldn't like shut down a team who's saying, here's the officiating decision, and as a result, we would like to see these things, and list multiple things, because one decision has impact on lots of other things. So sometimes it's worth listening to get some insight into what the team feels was affected by that singular decision. Great. We'll stop talking about this now. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. On that note, thank you very much. I mean, this is why it is great to be able to be having all of these officials in a space. And I hope to see you next week. Please do send us your questions that you would like us to go into more depth with as soon as possible, so that if we do need to try and make visuals, that we can do that. Yeah. On that note, bye. Have a great week. Oh, everyone wave back. Thanks. Bye.
And thank you.